Hi, Stephen Green here, founder of the Property Investment Academy, and welcome to this three-part series where we're going to be covering compound effect, leverage, and also the recycling strategy, my own model that I've made up myself. Now, in these three videos, we're going to be talking about the benefits of those and how you can actually apply them to speed up your results. So in the first video, we're going to cover leverage. Now, leverage is a little bit like, I want you to imagine having a huge boulder that you can't lift, but putting a big plank of wood underneath of it and creating leverage. And if you were to push down on that timber, you'd be able to lift a huge weight. So we can actually use leverage within property. Now, this came about from a conversation actually. We're having a family get together at Christmas time and we're all together with my cousins and my uncles and my parents. And my cousin made a comment about how property wasn't performing very well. He's an accountant and he said that out of 10 different investment types, property was actually down at the bottom. Now, I knew those stats, what he'd got and the angle what he was coming from, and the facts were actually right, but what people fail to miss is how you get leverage from property. So it doesn't actually give us a true estimation of what property can actually do. So having a bit of banter with my cousin and just saying, right, I'll show you exactly why those, you're right in what you're saying, and I get that property might have been a lower ROI, which means return on investment, but it's actually not true when you take leverage into account. So I got a piece of paper out and I said, Tony, you don't know what you're talking about. And we had a bit of banter and he said, right, okay. He said, explain to me exactly what you mean. He said, because I'm not quite with you. So this example here is the example that I give my cousin, Tony, at Christmas time. For ease of maths, we're going to keep the figures, rounded up figures. So I want you to imagine that you had £100,000 that you were able to invest. So you've got £100,000. Now I want you to imagine that, let's have a look at another investment type. So let's say it's stocks and shares or gold, silver, anything like that. Let's say that they're performing a 10% ROI, so a 10% return on investment. So a 10% return on investment. Now, on £100,000 at 10%, that would mean you would get £10,000. On the stats that my cousin gave me, we were talking probably only 0.4% difference of between the top sort of five. There was not a great deal in them at all, to be honest. But I'm going to be really harsh here, and let's say that property only returned as a 5%. So we're actually going to say that the gold, the silver, the stocks and shares doubled the performance of property. And then I'm going to show you how, even if that was to happen, how with leverage, property would still be a better investment. So we're going to say we've got the same £100,000, but this time property only gives us a 5% ROI. So we're going to say we get a 5%, so it's actually half of what the other investments were. Now, this is not what my cousin quoted. It was actually very marginal. If it was 10%, then the property was something like 9.2 or something like that. But it was still well down on the list, and the facts were there to see. This study had been done, and property, I think it was 7th or 8th on the list, but they weren't taking in consideration leverage. So what I want you to imagine now is what you do is with that £100,000 is you buy £400,000 properties. Now, if you were to buy a £100,000 property and you only needed to use, if the bank was to give you a 75% LTV, meaning loan to value, then the bank would put in 75% and you would only put in 25%. So if you were buying a £100,000 property, you would only need to put in £25,000. So you could actually buy four £25,000 deposits. You've got enough for, you've got enough for four deposits at £25,000, meaning you now have 4 times £100,000 houses. So in total now we would have £400,000 worth of property. So a quick recap before we do the figures on it. Example number one on the gold, stock, shares, whatever that is, £100,000 in, 10% ROI, and you're getting a £10,000 return. With the property, we use the same 100,000 and we split it into 4 times £25,000 deposits, which allows us to buy 4 times £100,000 properties, which means we have £400,000 worth of property. Now we're going to say that this property, your property investment only give you a 5% ROI. Now if you were to get a 5% ROI on £400,000, let's see how quick you are with the maths, what would that figure be? 5% of £400,000 is, and if you got that, that's actually £20,000. So we now have, from property, even at a 5% ROI, you are gaining double what any of those other investments are giving you, because you're getting leverage on the bank's money. So out of this £400,000 worth of property, you've only put in 100,000. The bank have put up 300,000, but you get to keep the gain on that £300,000. So you're getting leverage on somebody else's money. And that's a little bit like having a bank account where somebody puts the money in for you, and you get to keep the gain. And there's not any bank accounts like that. Certainly not what I know of anyway. So looking at leverage, you can see, and I've been really harsh here, and I've said that property was outperformed double by any of those other investments. Now, even if it outperformed double over property, property is still double the investment of what the other investments were, the gold, the silver, the stocks and shares. Now, if you were to get 10% on this and they were both matched, then you would be up to £40,000. So you'd have a 400% increase on your other investments, the gold and the silver and bits like that. I hope that's been useful, and I hope that's been a little bit of an eye-opener to how good property investment can actually be and how we can use leverage to our advantage. That's it for today's video. So somewhere, if you're on YouTube, you'll be able to see in the description, there'll be a link to the Property Investment Academy. So if you want to come along to our training, or maybe you just have a question, if you want to put a question in the comments box anywhere below, me or one of my team will get back to you. We'll aim to answer your questions, and we hope to see you on some property investment training in the future. Thank you, Stephen.